I have not done this in a while, but hello YouTube and welcome to a deck profile video. This is the first time I've done anything related to being on the internet for a very long time, but it's the end of Lorcana's first chapter and I wanted to give a insight into what I've been playing all for these past few months and what I think. I'll give you insights into matchups, why I'm playing specific cards, and why I settled ultimately on this 61 cards to end off this chapter, because I love this game and I really like talking about this game. So I'm gonna go in order of, I should probably talk about the deck first. All month, well, I don't know why I'm saying month, but all these past 3 months I've been playing Sapphire, Amethyst Control, Sapphire, Amethyst Ramp, whatever you want to call it. Although, so you could call it Belle Control, Belle Ramp, depends, ultimately it's kind of changed identities a few times throughout these few months. However, this is in my opinion is the best possible way to play this deck at this point in time. Bearing in mind this is being recorded on the Monday. We are 4 or 5 days out from Rise of the Floodborn, so this can completely change, but I also want this ultimately as a reminder of this format and what this format was. So we're gonna just start off in order of ink cost and just work our way up. So we're gonna start off with our 1-drops. We play 4. There's no need to play 8, I don't think. It's ultimately a choice. I was playing 6, so I was playing 2 Archimedes. Didn't feel it was necessary. You draw into them a little too late, and this deck skips past the lowering costs so quickly that it just doesn't really feel that relevant. This is probably one of the most important cards in the whole list. I mean, naturally, right? It's a ramp card, but Grammatala, this card is consistently very strong. I played this card at 3 copies for quite a while, but the more and more I played this deck, the more I felt like Tala is generally, unless it's the very end of the game, a very good draw to have, because it's either a very obvious ink or it's an incredible early game ramp tool. Not as good as another card we will mention in a very short while, but yeah, you play 4. I don't think you cut Tala in any capacity. Next 2-drop is, we play 2 Fill. Tested with 4 Fill for a while, didn't really like it. I think Fill is a little too slow to be playing at 4. Again, it's really solid against specific matchups. I'll talk about what matchups this deck struggles with later, but generally the rundown is that you're going to struggle against aggro, against very fast aggro, and having the ability to play a card that can act as a support to remove a card is really important. There's a lot of things that hit for less than 4, and 4 is quite an important number to hit. For example, Cusco. That's the only thing that springs to mind right now for some reason. But reaching those 4 or 5 damage thresholds can be very important. This works very well with a certain other 3-drop. Again, you can play more. I think 2 is fine. We're going to talk about probably the most obvious auto include. We're playing Amethyst, so of course we're maxing out on Maleficent Sorceress. This card is crazy. It pays for itself. It's a 3-drop that draws a card. I might have to cut that out. Sorry. Yeah, it's a 3-drop that pays for itself, and it is consistently great. It also sings one of the only 3-drop song we play, which I'll talk about songs at the very end of this list. Generally speaking, I don't think you play Amethyst without 4 copies of this card. I think if you are playing Amethyst without 4 copies of that card, you're probably playing... I don't even think Ruby Amethyst cuts it anymore. But we're going to talk about probably the most important card in the deck. Detective Mickey. Maxing out at 4 copies this card is completely essential. I'll talk about mulligans briefly later on, but the basic idea is if you don't have this in your opening hand, you are going to mulligan until you find this card. Because if you don't have this card in your opener, you have a much lower win rate. I have consistently won with this deck. Probably every match I have ever opened with Mickey, I have won, at least in paper. Or at the very least gotten, like I may have had like an 80-90% win rate that day. This card is absolutely insane. I'm going to talk about these sort of together, but we've got 2 Rafiki, and then we're also going to show off the 2 Jetsons. I think both of which are innately kind of connected. The Jetsons, you could argue that you should run 4 Rafiki, however, I don't like running too many uninkables, but Rafiki is a really solid removal tool, and then Jetson, of course, is a evasive removal tool, which in first chapter is generally incredibly difficult to come by. There's a lot of evasives in this format. There certainly was a few weeks ago. It's kind of calmed down a little bit now, at least locally for me, so Jetsam in general is kind of a tech option. You can consider 4 Rafiki, 4 Jetsam instead of the 2 Rafikis, or just depending on what your format was playing at the time. You would just play different combinations of this card. And again, benefits from Phil. You can make Rafiki into a 6/3 rush. You can basically make a little Maui out of him. Really solid cards. I don't like running too many uninkables, so that's simply why. Of course, the heart and soul of this deck, but the reality is you probably want to be inking Belle consistently until the time comes where you can actually use her. I think personally before you're at 8 ink or so, she's kind of useless. In general, while this card is the core of the deck, it definitely isn't the only win condition. A lot of people consider this card a little too win more. It can be. It depends on the matchup, of course. I've won games. I've absolutely won games I should not have won because of this card. But while talking about this card, I think it's really important to talk about another card, because I think, in my personal opinion, if you're playing Belle, you also max out on Aurora. I don't think you play Belle whatsoever if you're not playing Aurora, and I don't think you play Aurora if you're not playing Belle. I think these 2 cards go together. These are 8 copies. As 8 copies are also included in any Belle deck you will play. This card protects her, and you don't play the lower target simply because you don't need to. You have so many great options at 2 ink and 3 ink that you should never be shifting into this anyway. If you're shifting into Aurora on turn 3, it means you missed Detective Mickey. So ultimately, I don't think you play Little Aurora. I think you max out 4 and 4 like this. Again, I've been seeing a lot more people play less Belle. I think if you play Belle at all, you should play it at 4, because otherwise you're kind of just wasting slots in otherwise what could be a better control option. This card wins games, but this card makes sure that this card wins games. Okay, I made a cut there. Hopefully the camera is stable enough to carry on now. We're going to talk about probably the least important 5-drop, and in my opinion, maybe one of the least important cards in this whole list. Earlier on this format, this card was a lot better. The reality is that this list that I'm building now has shifted more toward a control base than a tempo base that it used to have. We used to play another 5-drop. We used to play the Ward Donald. Ward Donald is not present in this list. I'll explain why and what I cut it for when I get to it. But this card, ultimately, it's a vanilla. It's incredibly well started, and it quests 3, and it's inkable. Like, that's why you play this card. Once something better comes out, you cut it completely. I don't think it's necessary in a post-Floodborn format, but we'll see. We have 2 Scar. This is another card I think we cut post-Floodborn, but I think this card really has helped me. I was surprised when people started cutting this, and I was playing this card at 1 copy, and I realized sometimes when you have to ink a card and it's the only card in hand that's inkable, you do have to get rid of the scar. And the reality is that sometimes if you get rid of the scar, you outright lose a trade that you could have won because you don't have the extra copy. More than 2 is excessive. You'll see that I kind of like to play 2 copies of a card if I think it's necessary, but not so necessary that you have to max out on it. Generally, those are the 2 quantities I'll jump between, is 2 or 4, but there are exceptions to that. I think the card's great, but again, I think it's another one of those ones you remove post Floodborn. The 6 cost has a lot of contention for this set. You've got the big Gaston coming. We'll just have to see. But we also play 4 Robin Hood. Evasive interaction is really important, and the draw power is also a bonus. The more you play this deck, the more comfortable you get with making sure that Robin Hood always draws for you. This card in general, I really struggled early on with this deck, thinking, oh, this card never draws me anything. It's ultimately because I was just misplaying it. If you're using your resources correctly, Robin Hood should almost always be drawing you a card. You have to sometimes weigh whether or not you overdraw with Maleficent and Friends, if you have them in hand, or you just go for the Robin Hood initially to get the single draw and later use the additional draws. I think this card is necessary at 4. Until we have more evasive interaction, you need this card. This card has sealed games for me purely because I don't have any other evasive interaction left. One of my Jetsams is in the discard, one of them is inked, or both of them are in the discard, or both of them are inked, or whatever. You need this to remove... I made a cut there, but I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about Robin Hood anyway. We'll move on to the 7 drops, which obviously there's one that's going to come up, but we're running 2 copies of Ursula. I think generally this card is legitimately... I'm sort of undecided. The more I've played a lot with this in this format, I actually maxed out on it initially. I was playing at 4, then it went to 3, and now it's pretty much consistently locked to 2. I don't think the card is amazing, but if you're playing 4-player Lorcana, this card is nuts. If you're playing a tournament traditional Lorcana format, it's okay. Again, I think we wait until another card can take its place. Gaston seems like a really nice choice because Gaston is also uninkable. Generally, I don't think you play more than 2 Ursula. If you do play more than 2 Ursula, it's ultimately because you don't have this card. Because this card is self-explanatory to me. 3 Hades. Now, the initial question might be, why not 4 Hades? The reality is that I don't own 4 Hades, but the more I've played this deck, the more I've realized that 4 may be excessive anyway. It's already uninkable. You've already got the Rafikis, the Ursulas, and there's 2 more cards coming up that are uninkable. I don't like running more than uninkables than necessary, and I think that's why I struggle with Sapphire Steel, because I don't like the inconsistencies and being forced to use Fishbone Quill, but maybe Winnie the Pooh will change that, we'll see. This card is nuts. This card is the best card in Sapphire. This card is arguably the best card in Lorcana. This card is absolutely insane. It is a removal spell on legs that is lower statted than Maleficent. Yes, it's uninkable, but it's 2 cost lower. You're ramping to this on turn 5. Like, this is consistently insane. I cannot recommend using... You don't play the deck without Hades, and I know a lot of people will suggest, what do I cut if I don't own Hades as a budget option? I think the reality is that you don't cut Hades. I don't think you can play this list without Hades. I think it's so integral to your game plan, I think you lose otherwise. Finally, in terms of the characters, I am going to be talking about these together. We're running the 3 little Elsa and then the 2 big Elsa. This is the most recent addition to the deck list. This is what I ultimately consider the shift to a more controlled playstyle. One of the things I really struggled with this deck sometimes was just closing out games against mid-range. This card does that. This is the closer that you need to finish off matchups that you struggle with. I ultimately always thought maybe you just try and outpace them with Belle, maybe you just try and out-remove them with Hades, but I think the reality is that sometimes just tempo stopping at the end just to catch up on lore is the answer, and it has won me games. I think about my most recent local with this deck. I won 5 games total, all of which were closed out with this card. Every single one of them, I was in a position where I had less lore than my opponent that was trying to out-tempo me, slowed them down to a crawl with this card, and then had the singable removal, which we'll talk about soon, and Belle, and just closed out like that. And I think this card is necessary the more I've played with it. I don't think Little Elsa is as useful as it seems on paper. Maybe it's because I haven't had enough time playing the card. I've only really been running this package for about 2 weeks now, but I think the Big Elsa is necessary. I think also if you are playing Big Elsa, you do have to play Little Elsa anyway. Let's talk about the items, because we've only got the 3. We play 2 Eye of Fates and 1 Pocket Watch. This could be completely interchangeable. You could play 2 Pocket Watch, 1 Eye, 2 Eye, 1 Pocket Watch. Eye has won me games, Pocket Watch has won me games. This card is a card that it's difficult because you don't ink it. It's the same reality of if you have 2 Eye of Fates, or if you have 1 Eye of Fates and 2 Pocket Watch. I think maybe you should be playing 2 Pocket Watch and 1 Eye, simply because if you only have the 1 Eye in hand, it feels better to ink it than it does to ink a Pocket Watch. Inking this card loses you opportunities, whereas inking this card doesn't change the outcome hugely. It's arguably, again, it's a win more card, but you know, it's making Belle quest for 6, it's making Aurora quest for 3, it's making Elsa quest for 4. It can make math difference, and if you're playing a game where you're close to time and you really just need to eke out a win, Eye of the Fates works. It's a great card. Again, Pocket Watch is pretty self-explanatory. It makes things rush. Making things rush is necessary sometimes in certain matchups, in a specific matchup in particular, which that being like a Lemon Lime control, or maybe, not control, Lemon Lime aggro, or maybe a Amber Sapphire, which is probably this deck's weakest matchup in general. We max out on Let It Go. Best removal in Sapphire, singable removal in Sapphire. I don't think it's really that controversial to be maxing out on this card. This card is crazy. It's just nuts. And then finally, this is the stuff that I think is the most self-explanatory. You're playing Amethyst. You max out on friends on the other side. This deck is ultimately 61 cards, but with friends, you know, you're drawing 8. It's singable Pot of Greed. This card is nuts. For as long as you play Amethyst, you play this card. Same goes for the 3-drop Maleficent, I think, unless you're really tight on space. This card, however, I don't think ever gets cut. But ultimately, that is the 61 card list. There are going to be some things that I will mention. I'm not going to go too in-depth on mulligans. If you want specific mulligan information, I can talk about it separately in an easier to record setting. But basically, make sure you have a 1-2-3 ramp. If you don't have a 1-2-3 ramp, just have Detective Mickey in your hand. If you don't have Detective Mickey in your hand, you will struggle. If you have Belle in your opener, or if you have Belle in the first 5-6 turns, comfortably ink it. It's not an issue. The other thing I will mention is this deck does struggle against, I have mentioned them, Lemon Lime aggro, just pure Lemon Lime aggro, no interaction. simply because it really takes until about turn 3 or 4 to make this deck work. And if they're already kind of closing out the game before turn 3 or 4, it's sort of a lost cause. The other reality is that a card like what's a good example? Ruby Amber is a really tough matchup. I've played a fair amount against Ruby Amber, and I can tell you that that as a mid-range list is a lot more unique in the sense that Ruby is tough. Ruby Amethyst is tough. It's very winnable, but it's very tough. Ruby Amber is winnable, but it's very tough. I think in general, Be Prepared is a card you have to play around, and sometimes you can't play around it. Sometimes you need to commit to a board state, and that's okay, but you have to be aware that if you can't play around Be Prepared, sometimes you will just lose to Be Prepared. But I think otherwise that's going to do it for this deck profile. I think this in general is... I've spoken, I think, a fair amount about each card, maybe more than I needed to, really, but I think this list is my personal favorite for the entirety of the first chapter. I've played so much Lorcana in the past few months, and I can tell you, every single paper tournament that I have played with this deck, I've done very, very well. I don't think I have ever gotten less than top 5 with this list, and that's even on a bad day. So I think it's very, very strong in the first chapter format, and I think ultimately, if you were to look at an off-meta pick, if you are in the future maybe considering playing a first chapter format, I think this deck is an incredible choice, and I love it. I think this is probably... I already love this card game, but I think this is the deck that really cemented how much fun Lorcana can be. And yeah, if you have any questions as to why I picked something, have any questions as to why I'm not playing something, or maybe just want to offer different deck suggestions, or talk about how we would evolve this going into Rise of the Floodborn, either way I would appreciate it. I love interacting with the community, and I love talking about Lorcana. So other than that, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm sorry that the recording setup is not great here. The reality is that I was really struggling to find a way to record this deck, but yeah. I will hopefully see you in another video. Maybe I'll have another deck profile in the future, but I guess that's it, yeah.